Greetings and welcome to this episode of Let's Create Something with the Stardust plugin for After Effects. Stardust, if you don't already know this, is a super powerful plugin available for After Effects created by Superluminal. They've recently released an update to it, so it has a few new features. So if you don't have the latest version installed, I would suggest that you do so, or if you don't own that plugin, you can simply follow along with the trial that they provide on their website. What we're going to create today is this kind of a randomly generated looping flower of pearls. We're going to set that up using a very simple expression and a couple of duplicator nodes. So let's not have some weird and useless introduction speech in this episode. Let's start on right away. So let's get right in After Effects, and first thing we're going to do is let's create a new composition by hitting Ctrl N. And let's make it a square composition, so 1080 by 1080 with a frame rates of 30 frames per second and a duration of 720 frames. Let's call this composition Stardust Flower Pearl, and let's hit enter or click OK. Next, we're gonna apply our Stardust plugin by fetching it from our effects and preset panel here, and let's apply that on our solid that we haven't created yet. So first let's create our solid, Control Y. Let's make sure that it is the same size as our composition, and we're gonna call this Stardust. Hit enter, apply the effect on the solid, boom. Now we've got this little interface here going on. If you don't see this, simply click right here on this open button here, and if it's somewhere else, well, you can just drag it on here and have it exactly where you want in your After Effects interface. So what we have by default here is two nodes, one emitter and a particle node. And what we have here, if we go forward in the timeline, in the standard procedure for any particular plugin, a straightforward emission of particles in every direction. We are going to use a light emitter in this one, so let's create ourselves a light by hitting Ctrl Alt Shift L, and this one we can make it a point light, and let's call this emitter. Alright, so let's zero out this light first thing, so 540 on the X, 540 on the Y, and 0 on the Z. So now we have it straight in the middle. And the second thing, let's specify our emitter type. So instead of the point, let's select light. Right there. We're having 100 particles per second. That's okay. The direction of emission is uniform by default. Let's change that to directional. That'll give us a sideways spray of particle. Let's rotate it on the Z so it points downwards. So let's rotate it 90 degrees. Right there, and let's reduce the direction span down to 0. So instead of being a cone of emission, it's going to be a straight line, and that's what we're going to start with. Now, before we go any further, of course, we could start off with one of the many presets that they have available here in the preset panel. There are plenty of those waiting for you to explore just one click away, but you know what? We're not going to use any. We are going to do it from scratch. Now, don't get me wrong, presets can save you a lot of time, but since we're not in that much of a hurry, we're gonna take it on us to build it from scratch. In general, it's never that much useful to reinvent the wheel, and some would call that chronophage, but let's say we're dedicated enough to build it from the ground up. It's not gonna give us a very important advantage, but one thing that is for sure is that we'll know more about wheels than the average person knows about wheels. Let's use a little expression here on our light to create some kind of a movement. So this expression here we're gonna fetch from this guy, Dan Ebert. It is one expression that we often use if you have followed any of my previous tutorials. And don't worry, I'll post the link down in the description below so you don't have to pause the video and type it down yourself. So let's copy that patch of code that we have here. Control C, and let's get back to After Effects. And let's pick up our light. Let's hit P to reveal the position property. And let's alt click on the stopwatch here and paste our little patch of code. So I'm not going to explain what's going on here, but just so you know, it is a looping wiggle. So it's gonna wiggle our emitter around, and it's gonna do so in a loop. So here we have a variable to specify the length of the loop we want. Let's start with 6 seconds. So 6 seconds is 180 frames right there. So it's gonna do this wiggling motion here all the way up to frame 180. Let's hit shift 1 here to add a marker there, and then it's gonna start over again. So if we go all the way up to frame 360, 180 frames later in time, and we're gonna hit shift 3 here to create another marker so we can quickly move between both. And as we do so, we can just simply realize that they are our little wiggle here is exactly the same. It has some motion in between, but it's gonna be the same at the first frame as at the last frame, and that's very important. It's gonna basically be the foundation of what will gonna make this whole thing loop. So let's right at the first marker here, let's hit B to have the beginning of our work area from this point, and let's get to the frame 359. So I've just hit page up here from the frame 360, and let's hit N to close down our work area. So if we just basically preview this little motion, we're gonna have something that loops forever. All right, so that's a great start. Now, what are we going to do? Well, at first we can have some random colors in it, because right there we have many particles, but they are emitted in such a manner that they are all sticked together. So let's add some color on that right in the particle node here, down in the particle properties. And for the particle color, let's choose random from gradient. So right away we're gonna see some kind of they're gonna have different colors, but all shades of gray. So let's go to the color gradient here, and we have some presets available here, and in this case we're going to use one. So I don't know, let's try this one, the first one, and there we have random colors applied on our particles. Cool. Now let's add a replicator to that. So here is, if we click on this button here, it's going to add a replica node, which we are going to connect to our particle. Now we're not going to do something too crazy in here, but we're gonna simply replicate it 11 times, and on the angle Y we're gonna rotate it 30 degrees. So that's something like that we're gonna get. Very cool. So now that we have our little looping thing, let's get back to our little formula here. And there is something that we can type down manually here on the first row. So let's go to just at the beginning here and hit enter to create a new line. Get back on the top on the first row, let's type down seed random with capital R and open parentheses, and here we can type down any number that we want, and that'll act as our random generator. So this one is not entirely different. Let's try another number. So this will give us a different movement for our light, and it's still gonna loop. So if we go at frame here at the first frame and on the last frame, it's still gonna be looping. Now there is a difference since we changed the color. That'll be the perfect moment now to explain why we're gonna do the colorization a different way. So right now we're using the random color generator from the particle here, and we're picking up randomly one color in this gradient before it emits any particle. But the thing is that this doesn't loop. It's going on to create a new particle for the first 180 frames and assigning a different color on each, and after frame 180 it just keep on doing this random thing. So it's not the movement is going to be the same, but the color is going to be different here. So here is how we're going to do this different. Instead of coloring it with this option here, we're going to color it with the light color option. So in order to do that, we can just select here, instead of random from gradient, let's select from source. They'll be back to white again because that's the color of our light. But let's change that. Let's quickly twice tap on A with the light selected, and let's get on the frame 0. We're gonna be pretty quick about it, but let's select a few bright colors from the rainbow here. So let's create a keyframe. Let's hit shift and page down to go forward 10 frames. Let's select another color, maybe green, Let's hit once again shift page down. It's gonna be blue. Let's go back to maybe some kind of a pink like that. Now we're at frame 40. I'm still hitting shift and page down to skip 10 frames in the timeline. So let's click here, get an orange maybe. Once again, let's do that. Maybe a nice teal here. And for the last one, let's go back to the red. So right now we're at frame 60. We have the same color as we have on frame 0. Let's make this loop. So just alt click on the stopwatch here, even if it's already active here, we can alt click on there, and let's get an option here by clicking on this little arrow here under this menu under property. Let's choose loop out type cycle here and click it anywhere outside the area. So what that's gonna do is it's gonna loop our keyframes. So since 60 is a multiple of 180, it should be pretty fair on the colors here. If we don't want the smooth gradient in here, we can select all these keyframes here, right click and select toggle hold keyframe. And if we want to have more like individual particles, each one with a different color, here we can just copy that and paste it again. Maybe we can change things up in this one so we don't have any yellow. So let's double click on this. Okay, this one yellow, maybe this one another type of green, more of this kind of a green. And let's get right here, maybe we'll get purple. So we're gonna get a little bit more color in there. This orange is gonna be more of this type of an orange, and let's get a sky blue, and we end up with the same red. Now we have more colors in there. Let's grab them all and hold alt. Wait a minute, let's think about this. We have to keep this a multiple of 180, so 10 is gonna be all right. Let's reduce all that under only 10 frames. It's gonna be really tiny space between each keyframes, but we're gonna get closer to having each individual particles of a different color. And since 10 it's a multiple of 180, we can divide 180 by 10. We're gonna get the same color on the first and on the last frame. So that's pretty cool. Now that we have this kind of shape, let's add another replica. That's what's really fun about Stardust, is anything you have in mind, you can always add another node and keep on doing what you're doing. So let's add another replica. Let's connect it to the previous replica that we had here. So we have 2 replica nodes now. And this one, let's make maybe 5 copies. And we're gonna rotate them on the Z angle this time. And let's have it rotate by 60 degrees. So we're gonna have 6 pointing. We're gonna have some kind of a hexagonal based star shape filled with our points here. And once that we're pretty sure that everything loops, we have a cool setup that we can play around a lot more. So let's try to even more of the individual color on the particles. So let's get here to frame 5, and let's select all of these once again, hold alt and drag, and let's see what kind of a pattern that we'll get. And maybe we can play around with the amount of particles that we emit now. So instead of 100, let's try with a little bit less and see what it can do. And also we can add a little bit of inertia, so it's gonna add a little bit more of that movement based on the light's motion. So let's try something like that, and let's play that. So that's pretty cool now, but our particles are still flat shapes now. Let's make it more interesting by having them appear as spheres instead of simple flat circle particles. So let's do that. And perhaps I can just show you one thing before we do that. We do have a shadow property under the particles section. So if we were to open that, we would get the same kind of shadowing that we have in, for example, trap code particular. It's kind of an area shadow based on the size of the particle, which is pretty cool, but we're gonna get something even better. Let's create a model node here. So we have a model node. And let's also assign a material node to this model here. Let's put them right beside our replicas node. And let's connect our particle to the model. first we have to go under the particle here and we have to tell it to be a model type, a model shape type instead of a circle. And right away we're gonna get something a little bit different, but we have no spheres yet because right now it's looking into the model node and by default it's looking for a file. So there's anything you want you could put in there. If you open up an OBJ of a skull, for example, anything you would have as a 3D object, that would be what would load here with clicking here. But we're gonna use some of the, instead of a file, we're gonna use some of the built-in primitive shapes, under which we have by default the cube, and we can get our little spheres here. So right now we have something that's really interesting, I think. Is this also giving some light to our particles? So let's create ourselves an environment. So right here on the top of the stack, let's open up the render settings and let's go get an environment. So right here we can use 360 HDRI photo here to generate light and reflections to our object. So right here I'm gonna open up bridge, and we're gonna, right here I have a collection of 360 degrees equi-rectangular HDRI images. They come from Grayscale Gorilla. You can use any kind of HDRI image you want here, but I'm gonna use some of those here that I like. They are made to use in Cinema 4D, but you can use them in any software you want that use those type of images. So let's import this in here and let's drag it on inside our project, and let's get back to our Stardust here and right back to our environment settings and the render settings, and let's select this for our environment layer. So right there we got some light back. Of course, if you don't have any, you can just create an ambient light. I think that would be another way to get some kind of right. We have to specify that our emitter uses only lights which names start with the word emitter. So let's type emitter here, right under the emitter for the type emitting default here, starting with, click on there and type emitter here. So that'll prevent our ambient light to also emit particles. Let's get back in our material here. We have some control on our, we're diffusing the ambient here. But I like to use the environment, so let's get back to our Grayscale Gorilla Studio. Let's delete the ambient light. I'm gonna save, and let's continue. Can we get another number? Maybe that's an uneven. Let's get back to our keyframes there, and let's get back to 10. Or maybe keep it to 5, but just not have them as toggle held keyframes. Are we gonna get this kind of a color pattern? Let's try with 10. I'm gonna hold Alt once again and drag all of those selected. Let's see what we get. You can put any color you want here. I agree that we went a little fast here when we chose what we chose, but let's try to end it with a blue instead. Oh no, I changed them all. Let's undo that and let's make sure that we don't have them all selected, and let's make it blue. So now if we compare, yep, it's still the same. So we can still like play around with this number here if we want to get different shapes in here. Pretty straightforward. We can change this setting if we want to have more reflection in there. Let's get back to our material, and right under the reflection here we can increase the amount. Of course, if we drag this all the way up to 100, we're gonna get something like that. But I like to keep it around something like that. And what about the roughness here? You can also increase that a little bit. So we're trying to get some kind of a pearly look, and let's reduce the amount of particles. Right here we have, even if we only emit 35, there's a lot in there, so let's try 22 instead. Let's try to get them a little bit more separated. Let's try to keep them separated. So right around here, like we only need to emit nine particles. Oh, that's cool. We're gonna get different color patterns here. Ah, that's better. Get a little bit more variations here. So this is gonna have a randomly generated shapes are gonna appear when we preview that, and it's gonna take a little while to render. Let me perhaps set this down to quarter just for the moment. Oh, that's and one more thing that we can do here, we don't have any ambient occlusion, so we can just switch this on here. Right there we have a little bit more of that contact shadow between each element. So let's maybe increase, we can't increase the intensity, but what if we increase the gamma? Is this what's gonna make it all darker? Yeah, maybe not to the max, but depending on what you're aiming for. Try to get a little bit more shadow, increase the radius. Let's see what it does. All right, that's a little too big. We don't see those in the back. Let's reduce the radius and increase the gamma maybe to 6.66. So, yeah. Let's preview our little thing there. So once again, it's not the end of the world, just a little fun technique here that allows us to play around with generated shapes here, and you can render this out, have something cool to look at, create a whole bank of VJ elements here depending on what you're doing. You can have something else than spheres. You can have any shape you want here. What's up, boy? My dog is anxious that I finish to record this tutorial, I think. So right there, let's see what else. Let's try different numbers here. So yeah, totally random. We're gonna get something different, and also we can change the frequency. Right now, like, let's click on here and let's select our light and let's activate the layer control. So this is the motion basically that our light is doing on this seed random number. This would be the shape associated with this number. If we want, maybe we can make it move faster. Like, this is the frequency, so if we type down 3 instead of 1, we're gonna get even more zigzags. And we can also increase the amplitude. This is gonna, of course, make it move around a little bit further there, and it can also lead to interesting shapes. Like, really, nothing is planned here. Like, we're getting those totally by random, based on only a few different factors that we've played with together with Stardust. And let's see, we can get back to the emitter controls. We would get something totally different if we had it uniform. Maybe not. Let's try to put a little bit more of this inertia there. So they're getting a little bit further away. Let's see if our movement is correct. Boom. So that's pretty fun. Maybe it's a little bit too large, and we can even change the random seed in there. Will it change? The random seed doesn't change anything. We are manually creating this random here with our little expression and other inputs. So yeah, let's try it a little bit less in the frequency, maybe 0.56. I'm just messing around right now, so we're getting something more like that. Cool. So it's all about experimenting. I leave this into your hands, and I'm pretty sure you're gonna be able to show me so many great examples that you're gonna create with this technique, and I hope that it leads you to discover even more stuff that you can do starting with that. And of course, if you think of something else, message me. I would like to know what you created with this. There's of course many more stuff that we could do. Stardust is pretty powerful as a plugin. We're covering only a small tiny fraction of what's possible with this. Let's look at it from the very beginning. So let's see how it's getting generated from nothing. So of course, if you don't want the particles to pop up like that, we can have this little. Let's get into the particle settings, and right under overlife, let's have a little gradient on the size on the overlife property here, and let's get under preset. Let's choose one by default that is fast to choose, so this one. And just a little notice I feel like should throw in there. So since we are strictly, what we're doing is lots of possibility, lots of randomness in here to create those nice structures here. But since we have this really specific way of creating the loop, a lot of things are going to mess up the loop. For example, if we were to change the random scale of the particles from the setting here. So let me show you. In the particle properties, usually it's something that we use and there's no problem, the size random. But with this technique, once again, for the same reason as the color wouldn't loop earlier, like it's gonna make a random size for the particles. Let's wait until it loads, but it's not gonna loop. Okay, oh yeah, it doesn't change the color, it's just that like it changed the size and the colors seem to be changing a little bit, but it's just the size. So let's keep the size random at 0. Let's keep anything that would be scrambling the randomness from the settings of Stardust, and let's keep it on the, like, if we really did want randomness on the scale, I think that one way it would be possible to do by using layer maps. So for example, let me try, and maybe that'll work, and if it doesn't work, I'm sorry for bringing you into this. So let's try a field here, and for the field type, let's choose maps, and we're gonna just try that very quickly. Layer. Time sample, current time, affect the size, and we're just gonna create a little fractal composition. So let's create a new solid, Control Y, fractal, and this is the advanced part, so I'm going a little bit faster than I should maybe. And let's get our basic fractal noise from the noise and grain, native After Effects effect. And let's just pre-comp that for the moment. Let's keep it as it is. So move all attributes. And let's get back to Stardust, to our field. It's not connected to anything, but I think it's going to affect it even though. And let's select our fractal comp here. And let's select X and Y from project and apply axis X and Y as well. Is this gonna work? So yeah, we do have some randomness on the size here, and since we're not animating the fractal, like it's getting the size of each of the particles based on the brightness and dark levels of this image here generated by the Fractal Noise. So let's lock it down here and let's just come back in here. So if we want to change the randomness of that, maybe just change the random seed here and it's gonna give us a different result. Can change the contrast. And right now it seems that we're having we should be having a darker patch here, and right where they are small it should be lighter, and our pattern should be pretty big. So let's try to reduce that. Let's try to have our fractal pattern a little bit smaller than that. And right there we're getting a little bit more variation overall. So we don't need to connect it to the particle. I guess that if we would have something else in there that we didn't want it to affect, well, we could connect it directly to the particle and have the rest not affected by our fill. So yeah, this is a little bonus. I didn't even plan this out before, so it might have some disadvantage here that I'm not really that I might be skipping over here, but if you find it, tell me. So that's another avenue here if we really want to have some randomness in the size of our little pearl spheres here. Does that look Christmassy enough for you? It's Christmas time. It's 20 December. Yep. So that's what we're doing. Oh, we're having some glitches on the motion, I think, because of the map. Wait a minute. Let's go back to here and on a field. Save that. And let's unlock that because we're locked on the fractal here. And let's just verify one thing. Maybe we're not doing it right. Let's see. Let's try the particle birth instead of current time. But yeah, we're not animating the... Let's try from XYZ instead. See if it's still... if they are still gonna tilt. Yeah, they're still popping out. So that would be something to experiment further on with. I think since I didn't plan this out from the beginning, there's something that I'm not doing right for the moment right now for it to work flawlessly. I'm sure you're gonna find out and you're gonna tell me in the comments. Hey, that's why we have to figure it out and plan things out before starting the recorded tutorial. But I was so excited to show you this nice thing that I'm sure that I hope it doesn't bother you that much. That's all about I had to say today, and as always, thank you very much for watching and see you next time.